The following story took place in Georgia, USA in the early 1960s. Psychic hunches and premonitions ran in Mary Eastman's family, where her mother was able to foretell every major event that would affect her family. And it was so normal for the family to experience her abilities that when Mary was a child, she was surprised that other families did not have a mother with the same gifts. Mary's mother also had the ability to read tarot cards, but on one occasion, when she agreed to read the cards, she found that she had foreseen her own death, and within a year, her prediction had come to pass. 1 week after her funeral, a cousin of Mary's by the name of Carrie was sitting on the sofa watching television, when suddenly her aunt, Mary's mother, was standing in front of her with a smile on her face. Her auntie then lifted her arms in the air and said, "I'm not dead, see?" Carrie was thrown into a state of shock and quickly rang another cousin to seek verification that her Aunt Mary was really dead. Her cousin replied, "Well, she's definitely dead because we buried her last week." Carrie then sat back down on the sofa, believing she had dreamt everything, but a moment later her aunt reappeared and repeated the same message. Although Mary had grown up with psychic awareness, she herself never pursued it. Mary was later to marry a doctor and gave birth to 2 girls, Katie and Boots. But after 18 years, the marriage sadly ended, where she was left alone in the house with her 2 daughters, who were now teenagers. They later moved out of the house in late 1962 and moved into an 18-year-old, 2-story, 3-bedroom house in Atlanta. The moment they'd moved in, Mary felt there was something strange about the house, when one night she was suddenly awoken by the sound of someone digging downstairs. She initially ignored the sounds, believing the neighbours were doing some digging for whatever reason, but when the noise continued night after night, Mary could no longer ignore matters. After closer listening, she realised that the digging appeared to be coming from beneath the stairs, directly under her bedroom, which was the basement. Mary was now curious as to what the sounds could be, and decided to go downstairs and look for herself. When she reached the location where she believed the sounds had emanated from, there was nothing to be seen either inside or outside of the house. Mary had expected to see scurrying rats or freshly turned up dirt, or the neighbours hard at work, but there was nothing to be seen. Mary went back to bed and the digging thankfully ceased. Unfortunately, the mysterious sounds that had originally awoken Mary had gone to another level. When exactly 2 a.m. the following morning, she and her daughters could hear the sound of someone trying to break into the house. When they inspected, there was nobody there. This pattern then repeated itself night after night, when Mary and her daughters were now losing sleep. Mary finally called the police, who quickly attended but found no evidence of a break-in. Mary decided to have heavy bolts installed to the rear and front of the house. The following day, Mary returned home after shopping, and after entering, found that the bolts had been torn away from the back door, from the inside. Mary would often have an afternoon nap, but her naps were now being disturbed by the sound of someone walking around the house, as if he or she knew the house well, and was followed by running water and a flushing toilet. How could they have entered when both doors were securely bolted? The disturbances continued as she was doing the laundry in the basement and could hear the sound of footsteps overhead, and then the sound of drawers being opened and closed and running water. Mary was determined to get her afternoon nap and decided to change the time to sleep. But whatever time she changed it to, the presence would adjust its disturbance to that new time. It was as if they could read her mind. On another occasion, her daughter Katie felt a pair of hands on her during the night when she knew she was by herself. On another terrifying occasion, Mary saw a pair of men's slippers appear in front of her with only the feet in them, but no other part of the body. But they slowly faded away. The family quickly grabbed some belongings and left the house. On another occasion, objects such as books would suddenly disappear and then reappear in other places. Someone was now playing cat and mouse with them, but who and why? At one time, They could all hear the sound of a typewriter in the basement, but they did not own a typewriter. One night Katie was awakened from a deep sleep and felt the presence of someone in her room, and then beside her bed. She could see a shadowy figure. The figure then vanished, but other strange events were now happening more often when someone kept pulling Mary's blankets off of her. It eventually became obvious to Mary and her daughters that there was more than one entity, where on one occasion they could hear the quick footsteps of a child running, accompanied by the heavier sound of an adult's footsteps. In January 1968, when they'd come to terms with the disturbances, Mary was awoken by the faint sound of music coming from the kitchen ventilator, and when she inspected, she could not find where the music was coming from. One night in bed, she could hear footsteps, and one set appeared to turn towards Katie's bedroom, while the other walked towards her bed, then abruptly stopped. She then felt an icy touch on her chest, where she screamed and jumped out of bed. She quickly checked her daughter's room and found Katie fast asleep. As she was standing at her daughter's bedroom door, she could smell a mixture of oil, gasoline and dirt coming from the bedroom, which smelled like an old gas station. Mary was now becoming concerned about both the seen and unseen forces at work in her house, and how they were able to manifest themselves this way. One night she awoke to the sound of a female voice in Katie's room, repeating the same phrase over and over again. Golden sand. The voice sounded kind and gentle, and Katie was repeating it back in a childish voice and not her adult voice. Then she heard Katie clap her hands and say, "Now what can I do?" Mary quietly crept to her daughter's room and peeked through the door, expecting to see Katie sitting up in bed, but she was fast asleep. She woke her daughter, who looked confused, and told her to come into her bedroom, where she slept the rest of the night. The following morning, Mary asked Katie about the phrase golden sand, and did she remember saying it last night? She did not. However, it did sound familiar to her. A few days later, Katie spoke with Mary about an experiment she had undertaken the previous year during the Christmas holidays. She said that one evening she and two other girls decided to try out a homemade Ouija board and managed to communicate with a girl called Kathy, who'd claimed she had been murdered by her own brother, who lived with her mother and herself in a nearby house. She claimed they also had an insane stepfather, and it was his troublesome ghost, along with the mother and herself, that was causing all the problems in their house. The year was 1949, and the spot they buried her body was the area the digging sounds were coming from. Katie did not put much trust in the Ouija board and chose to ignore it. One night, Katie felt someone stroking her hair, and as she turned to look, could see a woman aged about 40. In order to find out what the woman wanted, Mary turned her own gift of mediumship and managed to communicate with her, where the woman repeated over and over again, "I need your help to cross the stream." Did this woman need help to break from the house and cross to the other side? But she did not know how to help her. 3 days later, as she was having her afternoon sleep, she heard someone come through the front door. She sat up in bed and screamed at it to go away. Then she heard an angry male voice say, "She can see me." But Mary saw nothing. A few hours later, she heard the familiar female voice whisper in her ear, "I need your help." Mary asked, "Where are you?" And she replied, "In the basement, in the dirt." Mary figured it was a male spirit causing all the trouble, while the female spirit was trying to protect everyone. Mary was now regularly feeling the woman's presence, but could not help her. Unfortunately, it seems that the friendly she got with the female spirit, the angrier the male spirit became. Mary had to find ways to get rid of the spirits. The voices and the footsteps started to get louder and more frequent, where the entities had now exhausted Mary, and after turning to her religion for strength, without any luck, voluntarily checked herself into a hospital to help her recover from a haunted house. On returning home, Mary sought help from people involved in psychic research in an effort to exorcise the presence in her home. The group carried out rituals to cast out the troublesome entities, but without much luck. She no longer heard the woman's voice, but the male became even more aggressive and demanding. He would scream at her to get up and do something, and her only salvation was to take sleeping tablets. One day the woman's voice managed to break through again and said she needed her to come to the basement, and the voice suddenly faded. Mary went down to the basement as she felt pity for the poor spirit. Short time later, everything in the house appeared to go quiet, and Mary wondered whether her presence in the basement had somehow allowed the woman to cross over. Hopefully, with the woman gone, the male spirit would no longer have strength to threaten. The house was now quiet as days grew into weeks and weeks into months, and the troublesome house remained calm.